Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Nostalgic Pumpkin Productions. Happy September 17th. And for those of you who are Roddy McDowall fans, you will know that this means it is Roddy McDowall's birthday. So happy Roddy Day to all of you. I just have a little bit of an introduction before I begin the show today. Those of you who follow the Roddy McDowall tribute page that my friend Iris and I run for Roddy on Facebook will already be aware that I previously announced there will be no brand new episode of the Roddy McDowall podcast this year due to my being too busy taking part in creative projects outside of this channel. Having said that, it felt absolutely criminal not to have a video celebrating Roddy's special day this year, so I decided to celebrate by revisiting an old podcast episode that I did on the Ballad of Tam Lin in 2018. Now, those of you who are aware of the Ballad of Tam Lin are probably also aware that this was Roddy's first and only directing project, and his friend and most favorite actress of all time, Ava Gardner, took part in the project. So this film was always very close to Roddy's heart, and that's why it felt right to use this episode as my feature presentation for today. However, I made the decision to do this episode at the literal last minute yesterday evening around 6 p.m. So due to time constraints, I've trimmed the original episode way down. If you would like to hear the episode in full, you can still check it out on any of your favorite podcast apps. I'm also just throwing a lot of photos together for this from the production and just kind of letting things land willy-nilly just so that the screen doesn't have one single photo for the entire thing, because I found that people find that really boring and it also burns an image into your screen, which is very inconvenient. So I just wanted to make it so that you guys have something that you can also watch as you listen to the episode. And now for a quick disclaimer. I want to apologize in advance for the audio quality being a bit crap today. My editing software that I use for all of my projects is temporarily out of commission, so I'm unable to make the audio for this intro be up to my usual standards. However, the audio for the rest of the episode will be fine. Okay, that is all. I hope all of you guys enjoy this episode on the Ballad of Tam Lin from 2018 on the Roddy McDowall podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Not Just Yesterday, the Roddy McDowall podcast. This is episode 2 of my series on Roddy's perspective of his days filming the Planet of the Apes saga. But for all intents and purposes in chronological order to the show itself, this is in fact episode 6 of Not Just Yesterday. Today's episode presents an exciting look into Roddy's creative mind as we discuss his film, The Ballad of Tam Lin. This was Roddy's one and only directorial endeavor, which is disappointing to be sure. But considering the difficulties he experienced while creating this film, his decision to never return is certainly understandable. I am jumping ahead of myself, however, as those situations of which I speak now will be more fully broached during the research section of this show. I would now like to present you with a wonderful surprise as my opener for today's discussion. About 6 months ago, I learned from Julie Carricker that when the VHS release of Tam Lin came about in 1997, Roddy filmed an introduction to it, which was included at the beginning section of the tape. At the time I learned of this, there was no copy available of the tape which contained the special introduction. Interestingly, as though fate somehow knew that I would be researching this film for a show, the tape became available online 4 weeks ago, when I was in the beginning stages of writing this very script. Without hesitation, I snapped the tape up, which to my glee arrived 2 days later. I then recorded the introduction from the VHS tape into an audio format, which I will now insert into the show. I would like to apologize before doing so, however, as the audio was recorded directly from my television into my computer from a used VHS tape which is now approximately 18 years old. The audio quality, therefore, isn't much to write home about. However, thanks to Roddy's impeccable diction and a little bit of editing magic, I have managed to boost the audio enough that though some sections may be somewhat distorted, you can still easily understand all that is being said. Therefore, I now give the floor to Roddy. This introduction is 18 minutes long, so sit back and get comfortable, as I will jump right into the movie when Roddy has finished speaking. Enjoy.
Hello, I'm Roddy McDowall, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to a select group of most extraordinary women. Every one of these leading ladies brings to her work a unique style and irresistible presence, earning each of them an enduring legacy in the annals of filmmaking. Some I've had the privilege to know and work with. All are either nominees or winners of Academy Awards, and each plays an indispensable role in this captivating collection from Republic Pictures. So, now allow me to introduce you to these legendary ladies of the silver screen. As far as I can chart, The Ballad of Tam Lin was Ava Gardner's 44th motion picture. It was filmed in Scotland and at Pinewood Studios outside London when she was 47 years old. The movie spanned a 3-month schedule, commencing on July the 7th, 1969, but it was not released until late 1971. It has been recorded in filmographies under varying titles: The Ballad of Tam Lin, The Devil's Widow, Devil's Woman, or Games and Toys. By the time Ava Gardner played this leading role, she'd been in films for a quarter of a century. For 2 decades, she had been the essence of the legendary movie star. She had by no means been an overnight success, and unlike so many of her less durable contemporaries, she did not have that one role that catapulted her to the pinnacle of stardom. Rather, her persona gradually infiltrated public consciousness, and this was due to the protective manipulation of her studio and her incomparably photogenic beauty. Her looks were so exceptional that they overwhelmed her native talent for acting, and she never had one moment's confidence in her performing abilities. She was a completely intuitive talent and responded in direct relation to her trust in the director at hand. Her immense lack of self-confidence triggered a variety of protective reactions, many of which were detrimental to her success as a performer and to her well-being as a woman. This bottomless lack of confidence plagued her throughout her entire career and caused her no end of woe. She was an amazing force. There was no aspect of her physical appearance that was in flaw. She seemed to have ideal proportions, and her designers never had to compensate for imperfections in her physique or bearing. Irene Sharaff, one of the greatest of costume designers, always claimed that Ava Gardner was the ultimate perfection of beauty. Well, she certainly was. Tall, broad-shouldered. When action was called, she carried herself with feline grace and the dignity of an empress. Her speaking voice was smoky, her laughter bordered on the lusty, and her features were in unnervingly perfect balance, all of which contributed to her being one of the great occasions of her time. She was simply the definition of the word breathtaking. But she had no emotional resources to deal with the fact of it. It was almost as if she was estranged from her own beauty and was as amazed as anyone by the awesome effect she had on those around her. If you told her she was beautiful, she would literally start to shake with displacement. Ava was born on Christmas Eve in 1922. She was the 7th child of a family living on a tobacco farm in Gradtown, North Carolina. In her late teens, visiting New York with her sister, she was photographed professionally by her brother-in-law, Larry Tarr. Those images, among the first to capture her unique beauty, made their way to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, where they created a small sensation, and in 1940, Ava received her first contract from the studio that would be her home for the next 17 years. She served apprenticeship by way of endless photographic sessions of her posing provocatively with Thanksgiving turkeys, Easter bunnies, in sudsy bathtubs, a myriad of concoctions to celebrate Halloween and Christmas, along with a series of some small roles in some 20 movies before she was loaned out to United Artists in 1945 for the George Raft vehicle Whistle Stop. Loaned out again, this time to Universal, she appeared in the film in which she first attracted public attention, the searing 1946 release The Killers, the movie which made a major star of Burt Lancaster. After that, she quickly became one of the most renowned stars of the MGM family of stars. You know, more stars than there are in heaven. Always, as they used to say in those years, an eyeful, she graced a score of films over the following 25 years, always displaying veracity and the haunting quality of the forlorn, and on occasion, when she trusted the director, she was an amazement of excellence. Thank God that material survives, because there is no way to adequately describe her effect. Ultimately, she is heartbreaking, possessed with an incomparable world weariness, compassion, innocence, and vulnerability, colored by a streak of smoldering danger. Her Julie in the 1951 version of Showboat is complete verification of her abilities. Sadly, even though she had recorded the song Can't Help Lovin' That Man and Bill, MGM replaced her versions of the songs in the film. Yeah. They released them on the original soundtrack album on the premise that her name would lend drawing power to the record sales. Well, happily, those original vocal tracks were reinstated in the Showboat sequence of That's Entertainment 3, which was released in 1994, and it's ample proof of her talent as a singer. It is also a trifle bizarre to notate that she had sung successfully in her previous release that year, a film that contains one of her best remembered portrayals, when she was matched in such magic with James Mason in Albert Lewin's quite wonderful Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. And then she sang again in her next film, right after Showboat, Lone Star with Clark Gable. Yet one wonders why MGM didn't foster the full range of her talent. It must have been frustrating, and certainly could not have done much for her self-confidence. The studio's reasoning does give one pause. Nevertheless, in the middle 50s, Ava Gardner was at the pinnacle of Hollywood success. John Ford employed her to wonderful effect in the 1953 release Magombo with Clark Gable. In 1954, Joseph Mankiewicz directed her in one of her finest roles in The Barefoot Contessa, where her ethereal beauty and otherworldliness played perfectly against Humphrey Bogart's cynical reporter. In 1956, she responded to George Cukor with immense conviction as the complicated Victoria Jones in Bowanee Junction. But it was 8 years later, with the 1964 release of John Huston's Night of the Iguana, that Ava Gardner made her definitive screen impact as the freewheeling, charismatic, hedonistic, incendiary, compassionate, and despairing Tennessee Williams invention, Maxine Falk. She responded to each of those directors with complete trust, and each tapped dimensions of her talent that were close to her fragile, complex, emotional core. They applied the issue with grace, taste, with inclusion, insight, and humor, and in that exercise, she momentarily transcended her lifelong feelings of inadequacy. With them, she did not feel in jeopardy on any level. She was totally available both to their suggestions and to their invitation to sail out into a very special experience. Now, one of the great compliments of my life is that Ava Gardner trusted me, who had never directed a film before or since, to navigate her through a performance of a very complicated scenario. I think her contribution to the Ballad of Tam Lin is formidable. She negotiates the labyrinth of the villainous Mrs. Cazaret as a creature of seemingly totally opposite qualities. a soul only concerned with the welfare, support, happiness, and matriculation of those within her orbit, until she never once complained or took issue with my direction. She continually displayed confidence and subscribed totally to my view and demonstrated a confidence that was deeply supportive. The movie simply could not have worked without her. And at that time, you see, there were no other performers of the maturity, extravagant beauty, stature, and, though waning, the commercial viability to inhabit that role. And her legendary glamour permeates every moment she's on the screen. Directing this feature was a wondrous adventure because I was blessed with the very best of co-workers. An incomparable lighting cameraman, Billy Williams, a man of international reputation for his imaginative contribution to films such as Billion Dollar Brain, Women in Love, and The Magus. We plotted every shot before the production began. Don Ashton had previously been in charge of production design on such classics as Bridge on the River Kwai and Indiscreet. He provided ravishing motifs for Tam Lin. The costumes were in the hands of the remarkable Beatrice Dawson, who was in the top echelon of theatre and film design in England. John Victor Smith, Richard Lester's brilliant editor on How I Won the War and A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. He cut the film. Stanley Mann and Alan Ladd Jr. were the two producers of Determination, Stamina, and Value inside a collection of other controlling producing forces I count to have been of questionable attributes. Yeah, that is to put it mildly. But then, that is another story. The cast are of treasured memory, each and every one working toward realization of my concept with expertise, great good humor, and immense cooperation. Tam Lin was a complex project based on a Robert Burns border ballad written in the 1800s. It is a Gothic fairy tale that recounts the wiles of a bitch goddess, the queen of the fairies, one who enraptures and traps the young. Her industry is to beguile and in turn pillage the potential of their existence. But in the logic of the Gothic tale, she is compelled at the end of a 7-year cycle to sacrifice her favorite in order to refurbish her powers. She is doomed to walk the earth forever, an unfulfilled, endearing, seductive, voluptuous, opulent, praying mantis. In the original ballad, the hero is saved from annihilation by the love of a virtuous girl who holds him fast through the variations of the queen's vengeful design to obliterate him. The film retells this ancient fable in a modern light, setting the story in the swinging 60s of London and in the lush locations of the border country of England and Scotland. The cast included gallant veterans of immense ability, such as Cyril Cusack, Fabia Drake, and the highly renowned English comedian Richard Wattis in his only dramatic role as the chilling androgyne Elroy. The highly intelligent, facile, imaginative, and charming Ian McShane was the hero. Stephanie Beacham, in her first major film role, is of particular merit with a most difficult assignment, and there were nearly 20 other young performers who comprised the ensemble, all of whom were winning and full of collaboration. They all linger in my memory with immense gratitude. Upon completion of the post-production, the film drowned in bankruptcy and ownership passed to another company, which, in my view, treated the product with less than understanding of its content. And in its subsequent meager release a couple of years later, well, it sank like a stone. The film then seemed to disappear as the copyright passed from hand to hand until my own 35mm print seemed to be the only proof that the film had existed at all. However, 25 years later, after its release, Martin Scorsese screened that print, and through his admiration, determination, and support, the copyright was discovered. And then, through the belief and assistance of Republic Pictures, the elements were retrieved and the film has been restored. And now, almost 30 years later, it's being presented again. Ava Gardner had moved to Spain from America in 1955, and in essence was one of Madrid's main tourist attractions due to the theatrics of her personal lifestyle. Some 13 years later, she fled the country over tax problems and relocated to London, which was her base until her death. She was married 3 times, to Mickey Rooney for a little over a year, to Artie Shaw for 1 year, and to Frank Sinatra from 1948 until 1957. She was a creature of grappled loyalties and tumultuous self-doubts. She was a very rare experience at every turn. Michaela Cazaret in the Ballad of Tam Lin was the last major lead role that Ava Gardner played, even though she continued to perform in features and in television until 1986. After enduring a stroke that was of partial hindrance, she died on January the 25th, 1990, of pneumonia at her elegant flat in Ennismore Gardens in London at the age of 68, and, in spite of all endeavour, still beautiful. After 60 years in this profession, I must confess a sense of both amazement and gratitude in relation to the turn of events that have caused the Ballad of Tam Lin to be back in circulation. Besides the well of gratitude I feel toward that impeccable master filmmaker, Martin Scorsese, and Republic Pictures, there's a virtual army of souls to whom I am deeply indebted, those who have contributed to this restoration and the exhibition of this film. I owe them all vast gratitude. So, God bless film restoration, and God bless the valiance of Ava Gardner, who traversed endless displacement in relation to the task of living, but has left a canon of work that has enriched our film heritage no end, and hopefully, somewhere, subliminally, was acknowledged that she was destined to leave a remarkable legacy. This film is a part of her saga.
Every night at 7, you walk in as fresh as clover, and I begin to sigh all over again. Every night at 7, you come by like me returning, and me, oh my, I start in yearning again. You seem to bring faraway spring near me. I'm always in full bloom when you're in the room, for every night at 7, every time the same thing happens, I fall once again in love, but only with you.
In the late 1960s, interest in folk ballads and the occult became a burgeoning phenomenon, especially among musicians. Ancient ballads and legendary stories became inspirational muses and caused singers and songwriters to begin delving more deeply into folkloric mediums. Among these inspirational legendary tales was Robert Burns' adaptation of the Ballad of Tam Lin. Tam Lin is a form of the basic and usually rehashed morality tales of the time, warning young ladies against rendezvous with bold men. But this particular morality tale possesses a unique and arresting twist. Set in the Scottish Highlands, the ballad tells the story of Janet, sometimes called Janet or Margaret depending upon the version chosen, an innocent but headstrong daughter of the Laird Mackenzie. She is constantly told that no man will ever marry her, for she is too willful and has far too much of a mind of her own, which is not an attractive attribute for a woman to have who wishes to be a wife. Chronic old-mindedness, anyone? She is fascinated with the castle of Carterhaugh, which once belonged to her great-grandfather, and though it is widely known in her village that there is a curse upon the land and all children, especially young girls, are warned not to go there, Janet decides that someday she will go and take back the land, which is her true birthright. Upon her 16th birthday, she leaves her family home, despite warnings from her frightened parents, and journeys through the treacherous woods to Carterhaugh. She stumbles on a glen, which is full of tangled, dead vines and thorns, in the midst of which is a single, or double, again depending upon the version of the story, red rose. Intrigued by the flower's vibrant beauty among the dead foliage, Janet plucks the rose from the vine, and upon removing the bloom, summons up a beautiful young man. He is blonde and fair of face, wearing a kilt which bears a black and white tartan pattern. She asks him who he is, and he announces that he is called Tam Lin. Shocked at this information, Janet responds that this cannot be so, for Tam Lin is a name of legend, passed down in her family from her great-grandfather, and he is far too young to truly be Tam Lin, who was 16 at the time of his disappearance. Tam Lin tells her that what he says is true, and he is now 60 times 16 in age. She later returns home, only to find herself pregnant several weeks later. Frightened, she goes back to the glen to find Tam. When she informs him that she is pregnant with his child, he explains to her that he is a mortal man, not an elf as she had previously assumed, and that he is a prisoner of the Queen of the Fairies, who had saved him from death when he fell off his horse, all those hundreds of years ago. He wishes to regain his freedom, as he has fallen out of favor with the Fairy Queen, who is due to make her 7-year tithe to Hell on the eve of Samhain, and is planning to give Tam Lin as the sacrifice in place of herself. In order to save his life and free him from the Queen, Janet must prove to the Queen that she is his true human love. To do this, she must unseat Tam from his horse on the eve of Samhain and hold him fast, as he suffers various curses laid on him by the Queen. He explains that he will suffer being transformed into various carnivorous beasts during this time, but she must hold him fast regardless of these transformations, as he will do her no harm. Once he turns into a brand of fired iron, she is to throw him into a well and sprinkle holy water into the water after him. He will then emerge naked from the water, having his clothes burned during his transfiguration, and she must wrap a mantle of earthy green about him, as this is the color of the Fae people. Once this is completed, she must then sprinkle a ring of fresh garden earth around them both and hold him within the circle. This will prove to the Queen that he is no longer her property, and he belongs with his true love. Janet then goes home to prepare for his rescue. On the eve of Samhain, when the full moon has risen, Janet leaves her ancestral home, wearing a dress as red as human blood, and draped in a mantle of purest green grass. In her left pocket she carries fresh garden earth, and in her right a vial of holy water, given her by the local priest. When she arrives in the glen, she hides herself in the foliage and waits for the Fae people to pass. She is first passed by a man riding a black horse, then a brown, and sees Tam following behind on a horse of purest white. As instructed, she reaches up and unseats him from the horse, attracting the attention of the Fairy Queen. Furious, the Queen demands that Janet unhand him, as he is not her property. When Janet refuses, the Queen forces Tam to transform painfully, first into a roaring lion, then a gigantic wriggling snake, and then finally into a brand of fired iron. Doing as Tam told her, Janet picks up the iron and throws it into the well, sprinkling holy water into the well after dropping the iron in. A moment later, Tam emerges naked from the well. She drapes the mantle around him and sprinkles the circle of earth about their feet, closing them off permanently from the Fairy Queen. Resigned to the truth before her, the Fairy Queen gives Tam to Janet and rides off, releasing him from his imprisonment. Several months later, after Tam and Janet are married, their child is born, and Janet regains possession of her beloved castle of Carter Hall, which she renames Carter Hall. She and Tom soon after have 2 more children and live together in happiness for many years, proving all those who told her she was too smart to be married very wrong. This traditional folk story and song inspired artists like Anne Briggs to write songs like Young Tambling, where the seduction is given explicit detail, and Janet, called Margaret, attempts an abortion before resolving to keep the child and save Tambling. This motif was used in the film, though the seduction sequence was innocently portrayed through McDowall's direction, as in the film, Janet truly does magically become pregnant after merely kissing Tom. At the same time that Anne Briggs was singing Young Tambling, the Pentangle was bringing the ballad to traditional life for Roddy's film. Aided by orchestrations from Stanley Myers for the hip visualizations of the folklore story, the movie, once finally released in 1971 after 3 years of bankruptcy and ownership battles, inspired other horror films such as Nothing But the Night and The Wicker Man. The film shortly fell into obscurity for a time, but is now available on both DVD and VHS, and is happily also accessible for McDowall fans to view for free in its original form on YouTube. The actual production of The Ballad of Tam Lin took place in the summer of 1969 and was filmed on location in England and Scotland, and suffered many difficulties from the beginning. The main problem at the head of the production was that of Ava Gardner herself, though her director never felt they were truly problems. In an article written in 1971 by Leslie Wilkinson called From Child Star to Movie Director, Roddy was quoted discussing his high opinion of Gardner after taking a phone call from her during the interview. His quotes are as follows: "That was my star, the star of my film, Ava Gardner. She is an angel, the most adorable, affectionate, cooperative, talented, and I love her." When Wilkinson asked Roddy if he had had trouble with Miss Gardner on set, Roddy shook his head and remarked, "She is herself, ravishingly beautiful, with a beauty that has been enhanced by the years. A very special person who makes your life better for having known her." Wilkinson commented that he could see Roddy meant every single word. Roddy continued, "She is a real mine of talent, one who will respond the moment the camera starts turning. Elizabeth Taylor is another. They have perfected an art which makes them come to film life as soon as the camera turns." This may have been true, but Gardner was in fact a very fragile and introverted actress who, despite having a deep love for movies and the movie business, had become disillusioned with working as an actress. This stemmed from many abuses she had suffered over the years, primarily due to bad marriages with other actors and musicians. Her last marriage to Frank Sinatra especially had been very tumultuous and painful. The truths of the myriad pains Ava suffered from life was not known by very many, and she found it excruciatingly frightening to trust other people. This in turn made it more difficult for her to work with other actors with whom she was unfamiliar. When Roddy McDowall approached Ava to play the part of Michaela Cazaret, Gardner initially refused, as she didn't really enjoy working very much anymore, and she was very bored overall with the acting profession. Roddy had to beg, cajole, and flatter her endlessly before she finally agreed. When she did, Roddy made sure she never regretted it, and soon Gardner gained complete and total trust in him. Gardner came to trust Roddy so much, in fact, that at one point during the production, she confided in him, intimating that at one point during her tumultuous marriage to Frank Sinatra, she had suffered a miscarriage after Sinatra, drunk during an argument, had pushed her down the stairs. Roddy was absolutely furious at Sinatra upon learning this, so much so that it nearly consumed him. Several years later, in a moment of private anger with a trusted friend, Roddy broke Ava's confidence to him regarding the miscarriage. This was the only secret shared with him in confidence that he ever broke, and even then, only broke it because he knew the person to whom he was intimating the information was someone he could trust completely. Roddy loved and adored Ava so much, the pain of her miscarriage became his own. While filming Tam Lin, Roddy treated Gardner like the Hollywood royalty she was, as though she was his queen, and he her personal devoted subject. During the production, Roddy took Ava completely under his wing, frequently taking walks with her around the set, explaining to her every scene he had planned, showing her locations where they would be shot, discussing the lighting, and even the script. He did all he could to take the continuous monotony and boredom out of the project for her. The result was a mutual respect and a deep, loving affection between leading lady and director, a platonic love affair which would stand the test of time. Roddy absolutely worshipped Gardner and took care of her off-screen as well as on. Seeing that Ava was prone to fits of crippling depression when left alone, he encouraged the myriad of 20-something cast members that made up Michaela's coven to hang out with her on set and off at all hours when he saw how much happiness it brought to his leading lady. Soon a strong bond had developed between the main cast of youngsters and their star. Chiefly adoring were Joanna Lumley, who was the first to grow a friendship with Ava, and then leading man and upcoming star, Ian McShane. McShane and Gardner hit it off so well There were speculations and even hopes on the set that there may be a budding romance between them. No one knows whether one actually happened, however. Roddy said later in 1971 that the production was taken away from him after the film company which produced it, Commonwealth United, went bankrupt, taking with it Ava Gardner's earnings from the film. Gardner later sued the company to obtain her wages. The film was later purchased by American International Pictures, which in McDowall's words was, quote, recut into total mindlessness. I didn't even recognize it. I had to go back and find whole chunks of it and replace them. If it's a flop or if it makes $27 zillion, my feelings won't change. I know what I know, and that can't be printed at this time. Unquote. The cut from American International was in fact so horrendous that Roddy attempted to have his name removed from the opening credits prior to its release, but he failed. He was gutted by the loss of the film, but was even more so enraged by the careless nature in which Hollywood disposed of its films and the history they contained, all in the name of copyright ownership. In the 1971 article, Roddy, a Most Durable McDowall, written by Rex Reed, Roddy spoke about his film collection and how he had to carefully guard it due to this attitude. I can't allow the names of my films to appear in print, or some movie studio will send lawyers around to make trouble. They don't care about the films, they just care about your right to own them. Have you any idea how much nitrate film is disintegrating in vaults? They'd rather see it burn than be enjoyed by people for centuries to come. Hollywood has never preserved its own history. If it was not for private collectors, most of the great masterpieces would be gone forever. I asked for some of my early films and they told me to go. Wouldn't it be fascinating to see the outtakes of great movies? When something is cut, it's sent to a warehouse. The director's job is over, 3 or 4 years go by. Even the man who edited the film is gone. The notes and records are lost. When I did Cleopatra in Rome, I watched it go through many versions. All that film is lost forever. Think how interesting it would be to see all the screen tests of great stars. They exist somewhere, but nobody knows where. It's up to private collectors like myself to preserve as much of that history as we can. Unfortunately for Roddy, the greed of the Hollywood lawyers and their desire to see the films burn rather than be enjoyed by anyone did finally come around to bite him. Despite his never publishing the films he owned in his collection, word did soon reach the FBI, who unlawfully conducted a raid on several stars' personal film collections in 1974. Chief among the stars targeted was Roddy McDowall. After being incorrectly informed by someone with whom McDowall had traded that he was selling pirated films, the FBI took possession of Roddy's entire personal collection, taking from him over 500 films, which Roddy had been collecting since he had arrived in America in 1941. He was threatened with a prison sentence unless he cooperated with the officials conducting the raid and provided them with the names of other collectors. Terrified of losing his freedom, McDowall was forced to give the names of several of his closest friends who also collected old films from the studios. The list included Rock Hudson and Gene Hackman, among others. The FBI, now satisfied after taking what they wanted, cleared Roddy of any wrongdoing, but neglected to return his collection of films back to him. With over 30 years' worth of collecting lost, Roddy was absolutely devastated and confided in several of his closest friends, one of whom being comedienne Joan Rivers, about the pain it was causing him. However, as was characteristic of his nature, he remained silent and never spoke about the incident in public. Despite the many troubles the production of Tam Lin experienced both during filming and for years between and after its final release, Roddy still managed to win his movie back prior to his death. In 1997, Roddy learned that his film was in talks to be released on videotape for the first time. Eager to see his film released the way he had intended, he, together with acclaimed director Martin Scorsese, who became interested after viewing Roddy's personal copy at a private screening in McDowall's home, conducted an exhaustive and extensive search for the original negatives that had ended up on American International's cutting room floor. After several months, their search was successful, and Roddy was able to restore the film back to his original vision. Though the film is still obscure today and is considered a rare film due to its obscurity, the movie was transferred to DVD in 2011 and was thus brought into the attention of many movie lovers in our time. It has garnered many different reviews by various people, but mostly the film has brought one universal thought to the foreground: respect for Roddy McDowall and the vision he had in making the film. Though many may have difficulty grasping the film's concept, it is obvious as one watches Tam Lin that it was truly a labor of love. Every shot of the film is done masterfully. Nothing is missed in any frame, and one main theme is always crystal clear: Roddy's deep love for Ava Gardner. This past summer, I was privileged to visit the Hollywood Museum on my annual visit to Los Angeles to see my sister. Roddy's bathroom is a featured exhibit in the museum, and covering its 3.5 walls are all the photographs Roddy took, was given, and treasured of all of his friends from his life in the movies. On the vanity by his sink is a photograph of Ava Gardner, taken on the set of Tam Lin. She is sitting in a fur-lined cage, dressed as Michaela Cazaret. At the bottom right of the photograph, in Miss Gardner's elegant hand, is written the following inscription: "Dear Roddy, it is obvious I love, trust, honor, and obey you. I do. Love, Ava." No truer words could be spoken, and it is obvious that the love Ava had for Roddy was definitely reciprocated by her dear director, as yet another photo of Ava on the set of Tam Lin with Roddy hangs a few feet away on the wall by the towel rail in the forest green and Himalayan salt pink bathroom. The photo portrays a side view of the actress and director standing close to one another in a moment of personal conversation, Ava looking up, trustingly, into the soft brown eyes of her director and friend. Clad in jeans, a high-neck zip-up sweater, and big glasses, Roddy stands, his back to the camera, cradling both of Ava's hands lovingly in his own and holding them to his chest. The shared love of the two friends is not only obvious, but unforgettable and touching. That's all for this episode of Not Just Yesterday. Thank you for listening. I hope you will join me again when I return for my next episode, in which I will continue my journey through the Planet of the Apes saga. This is Zoe Dean signing off, and as always, dear friends, remember to keep smiling.
You seem to bring faraway spring near me. I'm always in full bloom when you're in the room, for every night at 7. You make it happen. Every time the same thing happens, I fall once again in love, but only with you. Every night about 7.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Not Just Yesterday, the Roddy McDowall podcast. The podcast is hosted, written, edited, and produced by Zoe Dean. The thoughts expressed on this podcast are those of the individual and do not necessarily represent or reflect those of Barren Space Productions, its partners, or affiliates. The films and television shows discussed and heard in these podcasts remain the property of their respective owners. Not Just Yesterday, the Roddy McDowall podcast is not affiliated with any major film or television company, and no copyright infringement is intended. Please visit barrenspace.com for this and other amazing content. This has been a Barren Space production.